The Telepathy Tapes and Facilitated Communication review of Episode 1, Supplemental, Exploring Facilitator Queuing in Touch-Based FC. Welcome to another critique of facilitated communication.
Why is it that most of the time, most of the autistic individuals are not looking at the keyboard?
Today's video is a supplement to a previous critique I did of Episode 1 of the Telepathy Tapes podcast. Links to that video are in the description box below. Goals of this video: to review the two main categories of facilitated communication, to identify the types and characteristics of the forms of FC used by participants featured in the Telepathy Tapes podcast, to point out facilitator behaviors in a telepathy test that raise concerns about who is controlling the activity, in this case, sorting colored popsicle sticks into piles. Observations from a former facilitator. What follows are my observations as a former facilitator who, unlike 100% of the current-day facilitators, participated in reliably controlled authorship testing in 1993, just 3 years after FC was introduced to the U.S. by Douglas Bicklin of Syracuse University. I've put timestamps in the description box below for those of you who'd like to skip around, but I'd like to take a moment to share some things I learned about FC after the testing. These are things workshop leaders failed to tell us in the training. What FC workshop leaders didn't tell us: FC was not then, and is not now, an evidence-based technique. Anecdotes and testimonials, aka feel-good miracle stories, are not evidence, though facilitators may sincerely believe in the technique. Reliably controlled tests consistently show that the FC-generated responses are only correct when the facilitators have access to the test stimuli. Question: if the communications are independent, why does the facilitator have to know the answers for it to quote-unquote work? When facilitators are blinded from test stimuli, the FC-generated responses are either incorrect, the clients can't spell; unintelligible, the clients don't have letter sound recognition; or correctly spelled with words that have nothing to do with the questions being asked, in other words, facilitator guesses. Most facilitators are unaware of the extent to which they use physical, visual, and/or auditory cues to influence and control letter selection. Well-intentioned people can be fooled by FC. I stopped using FC after the testing in 1993, but I have continued studying it over the past 30-plus years. I've also been waiting for proponents to conduct reliably controlled studies that address facilitator queuing and prove communication independence with these techniques. I am, and the world is, still waiting. Today's facilitators are taught not to participate in reliably controlled studies designed to separate facilitator behaviors from those of their clients or loved ones. Some facilitators claim it's unethical to test for authorship, but even without the reliably controlled testing, we can learn a great deal about facilitator behaviors through pro-FC movies, YouTube videos, and other media. The Telepathy Tapes. Introduction to the Telepathy Tapes and FC. The Telepathy Tapes podcast is currently drawing a lot of attention in the United States for its claims that non-speaking individuals with autism have telepathic abilities. The presenter of the podcast, Kai Dickens, and the experts featured in the podcast, however, downplay the fact that the autistic individuals featured in the podcast are being subjected to a discredited technique known as facilitated communication. Proponents of FC have yet to provide reliably controlled evidence that the technique leads to communication independence for the individuals being subjected to its use. In fact, the evidence shows that the facilitators are often inadvertently controlling letter selection. To date, facilitator authorship and FC-generated messages have only been ruled in, not ruled out, when tests have been conducted under reliably controlled conditions that blind facilitators from test stimuli. In the telepathy tapes, the participants, not the facilitators, are denied access to the pictures, words, and numbers being spelled out using FC. In each test, the facilitators knew the answer to the spelled responses. Promoters of the telepathy tapes seem confused about what constitutes facilitated communication, a technique that was discredited in the United States by 1995. Controlled studies and systematic reviews are available at www.facilitatedcommunication.org. Facilitator-dependent techniques. Facilitated communication, or FC, is an umbrella term that represents all facilitator-dependent techniques, regardless of whether the facilitator holds onto the client or holds onto the letterboard. Over the years, FC has evolved into two main categories, touch-based and no-touch forms of FC. Two main categories of facilitated communication. Touch-based FC. The facilitator supports the child by holding onto his wrist, forearm, elbow, shoulder, or other body part during letter selection. It's known as supported typing, saved by typing, assisted typing, hand over hand, letterboarding, and others. Minimal or no-touch FC. The facilitator holds a letterboard or stencil in the air while the child extends a finger toward it. Sometimes, but rarely, the child holds onto the keyboard or letterboard, but the facilitator still uses visual or auditory cues to aid in letter selection. It's known as rapid prompting method, spelling to communicate, speller's method, informative pointing, spelling with eyes, and others. Role of facilitators or communication regulation partners. Proponent view. Provide physical and emotional support. Study the motor movements of the individual. Redirect the individual's attention if necessary. Fade support from wrist to shoulder. Presume competence. And don't test. Skeptic view. Facilitators often unwittingly cue their clients in ways that not only influence but control letter selection. Fading support from the wrist to shoulder does not eliminate facilitator influence over letter selection. Authorship can be tested by controlling the information the facilitator sees during testing. Facilitator role in no-touch forms of FC. Proponent view. Communication difficulties in autistic individuals are primarily due to motor difficulties and require their support. Cueing cannot occur if the facilitator doesn't touch their client. There is a mind-to-mind bond between facilitator and child. Skeptic view. Many autistic individuals perform gross and fine motor activities independently and without facilitator interference, so why can't they select letters on a keyboard by themselves? Facilitators, however, unwittingly can cue their clients even when the board is being held in the air with minimal physical touch. FC conversations are one-sided and facilitator-controlled. For more detailed information about FC in all its variant forms, please visit facilitatedcommunication.org or FC is Not Science on YouTube. FC and telepathy. Promoters of the telepathy tapes want us to believe that non-speaking autistic individuals being subjected to FC, S2C, and RPM have telepathic abilities, but this is quite an extraordinary claim. Does FC work? Does telepathy exist? Proponent view. FC works because people using FC say it works. Telepathy works because facilitators and parents feel like it works. People who question these beliefs are against people with disabilities. Skeptic view. All reliably controlled tests of authorship to date demonstrate that the facilitator, not the individual being subjected to FC, are controlling the messages. Telepathy tests in FC cannot be determined until authorship is established. Testing for facilitator cues. The key to providing FC authorship and telepathic abilities is to determine whether the spelled responses can be attributed to the autistic individual without external cues from the facilitators. This is most reliably done through carefully controlled message passing tests that are designed to separate facilitator behaviors from those of the individual being subjected to FC. Main categories of facilitator cueing. Physical. Touches by the facilitator on the client's wrist, elbow, shoulder, or other body part. Even slight changes in pressure can influence letter selection. Visual. Movements from the facilitator, like head nods, hand signals, and shifts in body weight, can signal the client where on the letterboard to touch. Often these movements are inadvertent, but not always. Verbal or auditory. Spoken utterances that signal to the client where on the letterboard to touch, like when the facilitator says the sound of the target letter before the individual touches the board. It should be noted that facilitators may or may not be fully aware of the extent to which these cues influence and control letter selection. Facilitators are even taught in some workshops to prompt their hearts out. Purpose of cueing. Proponent view. To physically and emotionally support the client. To help regulate his or her movements. To help correct and/or prevent repetitive or self-stimming behaviors. Skeptic view. FC, S2C, and RPM doesn't work without facilitator cues. Individuals are essentially taught to point on cue through repetition and reinforcement of the desired behavior, like pointing a finger toward a letterboard. Any cues by the facilitator should be faded within days, not weeks or years, after teaching a client a new skill. A telepathy test. In today's example from the telepathy tapes, the non-speaking autistic individual is blindfolded and then asked to sort colored popsicle sticks into piles by color. Her mother, acting as facilitator, sits beside her and holds onto the girl's face during the sorting activity. The original video is 2 minutes and 23 seconds long and split into 3 camera angles. Here's how Kai Dickens, host of the Telepathy Tapes podcast, describes seeing the popsicle stick test in person. In fact, what you see on the footage is that she put the green sticks where the green sticks go, the red sticks where the red sticks go, the purple sticks where the purple sticks go, etc., etc., as though she could see through her mindfold. Note, mindfold is the brand name of the blindfold she's wearing. When the test was done, I was in complete shock and didn't even know the correct question to ask, so I asked, can she see through her mother's eyes? And they asked her, and she said, no, I can see everywhere. Note, Mia can't speak. She didn't say she could see everywhere. The response was generated via FC with her mother as facilitator. After the room had seen Mia accurately display her mind-reading abilities again and again with random numbers and random pictures, that now feels commonplace, but this popsicle stick test feels like a new frontier. A new frontier or the same old story? Let's look at a clip from the sorting activity more closely. Remember, to test for FC authorship or for telepathy, facilitator cueing and control must be ruled out. Though I think the facilitator's movements are obvious, I've annotated the clip with an arrow to draw your attention to the area of the video I'd like you to look. For this clip, I've used 18 seconds and only one of the camera angles from the original clip. Okay. Is this a reliably controlled test for telepathic abilities? Proponent view. Yes, the child was blinded from seeing the popsicle sticks and read her mother's mind to sort the colored popsicle sticks into the appropriate piles. She has superhuman powers and can see everywhere. Skeptic view. No, the mother could see the popsicle sticks, what color they were, and which piles to put them in. The mother guided the child by holding onto her head. Reliably controlled tests of authorship and/or tests of telepathic abilities rule out external cues, including influence by the facilitator. This test did not. Summary. The Telepathy Tapes is a popular podcast claiming that non-speaking individuals with autism have telepathic abilities. The producers of the podcast fail to inform their listeners that the individuals featured in the testing are being subjected to a discredited communication technique called facilitated communication. There are two main categories for FC, touch-based and minimal or no touch. Regardless of which form of FC the spellers in the podcast are being subjected to, there's no reliably controlled testing to prove proponent claims of independent communication among its users. Rather, facilitators, not those being subjected to FC, are likely the authors of FC-generated messages. Facilitators, though well-meaning, are often unaware of the extent to which they control letter selection through physical, visual, and auditory cueing. Anecdotes and testimonials, though interesting and often where scientific inquiry begins, are not evidence. In today's example of a telepathy test with FC, the mother appears to be using physical touch to move her daughter's head to sort colored popsicle sticks into their appropriate piles. For this to be a reliably controlled test for authorship or for telepathy, the facilitator would need to be blinded from the test stimuli. This telepathy test raises more questions than answers. Here are a few questions off the top of my head. Put your questions in the comments below this video if you can think of others regarding FC, telepathy, or this test. Questions. Does the daughter know how to sort colored popsicle sticks into piles without the blindfold? What would happen if her mother was not allowed to touch her daughter during the sorting activity, with and without the daughter being blindfolded? What would happen if the mother was out of visual and auditory range of her daughter during the sorting activity? The science. To date, there's no scientifically rigorous evidence to prove facilitated communication, spelling to communicate, rapid prompting method, or any of their variants produce independent communication. Controlled studies show that the facilitators, not their clients, are producing the typed messages. Many organizations oppose the use of facilitator-reliant techniques. These include, but are not limited to, American Speech-Language Hearing Association, American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, American Psychological Association, Association for Behavior Analysis, Association for Science in Autism Treatment. These organizations cite the following reasons they encourage their members not to use facilitator-reliant techniques: lack of scientific evidence, prompt dependency, facilitator cueing and control over letter selection, potential harms including false allegations of abuse, lost opportunity costs as individuals are prevented access to evidence-based forms of augmentative and alternative communication. This educational video is intended to draw attention to the problem of facilitated cueing in a technique called facilitated communication. Criticisms of FC, S2C, RPM, or any of their variants contained in this video are not directed at the individuals being subjected to its use. For more information about FC, please visit facilitatedcommunication.org. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment to help grow this project. Thank you for watching until the very end, and remember, FC is not science.